If you grew up black in the 1970s, you already know the world looked completely different. No internet, no smartphones, no Bluetooth speakers. Just vinyl spinning in the living room, the smell of Afro sheen in the air, and the entire neighborhood somehow knowing your business before you even got home. And today, we're going on a journey back in time, not through history books, not through documentaries, but through real memories. Because there are certain things only black folks who lived through the 70s truly understand. And if you remember even half of these, congratulations! You officially earned your nostalgia badge. Let's get into it. The first thing, the sound of Saturday morning. Not the cartoons, but the cleaning. Because in a black household in the 70s, Saturday morning didn't start with cereal. It started with chores, loud chores. You woke up to your mama blasting Earth, Wind, and Fire at full volume while she was already 3 rooms deep into cleaning. She didn't need a microphone, she just yelled your name through the house and somehow the acoustics carried like she had a PA system. And if you thought you were going to sleep in? Nope. Not with the sound of a vacuum from Sears practically knocking on your bedroom door. And speaking of sounds, if you grew up black in the 1970s, you remember the comb drawer. That drawer that had every hair tool known to humanity. The hot comb your grandma used on the stove, not the electric version, the real one. You remember sitting in the kitchen, praying the comb was cool enough, and not straight out the fire. Because one wrong move, one wrong flinch, and you'd smell nothing but smoke and disappointment. And don't forget Afro sheen, that bottle was essential. The 70s weren't the 70s without somebody in the house sporting the biggest, proudest afro you ever seen. That was an era where walking out the house with your hair picked perfectly round felt like wearing a crown. But the 1970s black experience wasn't just hair, it was community. And nobody did community like black folks in the 70s. The entire block was family. It didn't matter who actually lived in your house. You were getting disciplined by every adult on that street. Misbehave 1 block over? Your mama knew before you got home, because Karen from down the street. She wasn't calling your mom, she was walking to your house to snitch. When you grew up black in the 70s, privacy did not exist. Not because people were nosy, but because people genuinely cared. Neighborhoods were ecosystems. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on. And if you didn't come home the second those lights flickered on, someone was checking on you whether you liked it or not. And if you grew up in that era, then you remember the fashion. Lord, the fashion. Bell-bottoms so wide you could smuggle groceries in them. Platform shoes that turned every sidewalk into an obstacle course. Suits so colorful and sharp you could hurt somebody just by walking by. And the materials, polyester, rayon, and whatever synthetic magic created shirts that didn't wrinkle no matter how much you washed them. And we can't talk 70s black fashion without talking about the leather jackets. Those heavy, hot, beautiful jackets that made you feel like you were stepping out of a magazine ad. If you had a leather trench coat, you weren't just stylish, you were legendary. And speaking of legendary, let's talk music. Because black music in the 70s wasn't just good, it defined the decade. You remember hearing Marvin Gaye coming out of someone's window while walking to school. You remember the Isley Brothers playing so loud during summer cookouts that you could hear them 3 blocks away. You remember the first time you saw Soul Train, Don Cornelius telling you love, peace, and soul, while dancers moved smoother than water. Soul Train wasn't just entertainment. It was culture, style, identity, and every kid trying to learn the dance moves in their living room. And let's be real, if you grew up black in the 70s, then you definitely remember the snacks of that decade. Kool-Aid that could stain a cup permanently, chips that cost $0.25, the corner store that sold frozen cups, penny candy, and the best pickles you ever had in your life. Ice cream trucks that didn't just play music, they played the soundtrack of summer. And nothing hit harder than that popsicle on a 98-degree July afternoon. But if there's one thing that defined the 70s black childhood, it was the TV shows. You remember Good Times, JJ yelling, "Dynamite!" like it was the national anthem. You remember the Jeffersons moving on up. You remember Esther Roll being everybody's TV mama. And you remember that if you acted up during your favorite show, your mama didn't to turn off the TV, she told you to stand next to it and watch everyone else enjoy it. That was real punishment. But the 70s weren't just fun and games, they were a time of cultural pride. You remember seeing the impact of the civil rights movement still fresh. You remember the rise of black leaders, black voices, black authors, black creators. You remember going to the library and seeing books with faces that looked like yours. You remember the way people spoke about progress, not as something distant, but something happening around you. You remember being taught that your identity wasn't something to hide. It was something to shine, and if you grew up in the black church in the 70s, oh, you remember waking up early on Sundays and not getting home until evening. The church wasn't just a service, it was an entire social calendar. Choir practice, potlucks, youth meetings, church picnics. You remember wooden fans with funeral home ads, choir robes that were older than the choir members, and sermons that lasted long enough to make you question the space-time continuum. But you also remember the music, that gospel that filled your chest, lifted your spirit, and made even the most stubborn child clap. Let's talk toys. If you grew up black in the 70s, your toys weren't digital, they were durable. Jump ropes, jacks, marbles, and the famous lawn darts that probably should have been illegal. You remember board games where people argued for hours. You remember bikes with streamers on the handles and banana seats that made you feel unstoppable. You remember making up whole games outside because imagination was the original entertainment system. And speaking of being outside, you remember freedom. Real freedom. Running up and down the street with your friends, inventing adventures, building makeshift forts, racing each other, jumping rope to songs that every black kid somehow knew by heart. Being home all day wasn't normal. Being outside was the default setting. Let's hit some deeper memories. The 70s black household phone, that long spiraled cord that stretched across the whole kitchen because your mama needed to talk in peace. The living room that nobody was allowed to sit in unless company came over. Plastic couch covers that stuck to your legs like glue. The giant floor TV that stopped working, but instead of throwing it out, you put a new TV on top of it. The bookshelf filled with encyclopedias you actually used to do homework. The sewing machine your mom or grandma used to make everything from clothes to curtains. And the food. Soul food in the 70s wasn't a trend, it was survival, culture, love. Greens simmering all Sunday. Cornbread made in cast iron pans. Fried chicken that smelled so good you could smell it down the block. Sweet potato pies cooling in the window. And you remember very specifically that one auntie who put raisins in her potato salad. And nobody ever forgave her. We could go all day. The corner barbershops where debates lasted longer than haircuts. The beauty salons that smelled like press and curl and gossip. Motown records stacked by the turntable. The smell of incense in somebody's living room. Black art on the wall, from the praying hands to the black Jesus painting everybody had. Learning dances from your older cousins. Hearing your grandparents talk about how things used to be. Feeling proud of who you were, even in a world that didn't always understand you. Growing up black in the 70s wasn't perfect, but it was powerful. It was community, it was creativity, it was resilience. It was joy carved out of everyday life. And these memories, big and small, shaped a generation that shaped the world. So if even one of these made you smile, welcome back. And if you want a part 2, just say the word, because we've only scratched the surface. And if you're watching this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which memory hit you the hardest. Because these stories, these moments, these pieces of history, they deserve to be kept alive.